NeoPixels are pretty much my favorite thing right now. So what are NeoPixels? NeoPixels are individually addressable RGB LEDs created by Adafruit, and they allow you to easily control a strip, for example, or even individual LED lights that you might have wired up. And so you can get them in a variety of ways. NeoPixels sometimes come in a strip like this that you'll see anywhere from 60 to 120, etc. Sometimes they'll come individually. You can get them, like I said, in a variety of ways from Adafruit, and they're really easy to work with because they give you a library that will help you control each of these pixels one by one. A couple things to consider when looking at NeoPixels for your project is, especially on the Adafruit site, they do a really good job of outlining how much power you need for this whatever kind of NeoPixels you're running and the amount of NeoPixels you're running. So LEDs take a lot of power, and you need to be very considerate of that, especially if you're working with a microcontroller, because if you don't have enough power, they might not be bright enough, you might not be able to light all of them, you might not have enough power for other things that are going on. And so when you go to purchase your NeoPixels, they give you a calculation based on how many you have and what kind of power you're going to need. Often people will go make this calculation and have a separate source for their power. So it might be a portable battery pack. It might be one of those 5-volt plugins. It depends really on what your power needs are, and so you really need to consider that when you're looking at NeoPixels for your project or LEDs in general. So this spindle here that I have actually comes with a waterproof casing. And so often I'll buy them with a waterproof casing, which is handy if I want to, have a project that's going to live outside. An example being, Christmas lights or something along those lines. And so you can remove this casing no problem. And it's just a matter of stripping off this casing, and then you get down to the bare kind of NeoPixels here. NeoPixels, they often will give you, especially on a strip here, they'll give you these connectors already for you. But what you need to make sure, especially if you're going to maybe strip this, or you're going to maybe cut them and separate them out and solder some wires together, is that you need to take a really good look at the NeoPixels, and you need to look at, let's see if I can get that in close enough. You need to look at the direction that the arrow is going. And so you'll see this little arrow beside ground. And so each NeoPixel here, individually addressable, you pass it basically RGB, so expecting a value for R, G, and B. And then you'll have a ground pad. You'll have this middle pad, which is going to be what you need to use to control them. So that'll be, you might put that in pin 2, for example, in your spark or whatnot. And then we'll have this other one that's ground. So you need to make sure that if you are going to cut them or separate them, or even if you're going to add power, that you're making sure that if your power source is going to be here on this end, that it's going following this way, and that all of your pixels, when you wire them together, especially if you separate them out, that you're following the direction of that arrow. On Adafruit's site, they also give you kind of best practices. They call it the Uber Guide for NeoPixels. And so they will outline things that you could be doing best practices. One is to have a capacitor, so you can kind of, taper off that initial flush of power or energy that sometimes can blow out your first pixel. They'll, help you with powering, helping you decide which ones you need for your project. And so just following that guide is really handy just for some best practices. Now, a strip like this, I think, which is about 60 pixels, I've never really used a capacitor. Don't do as I say, I guess is the best way to put it. Usually what I do is I'll test them out, and I'll just strip the power and the ground here, and I'll alligator clip them in, and then I'll just connect a wire into the white here. And so if I'm on an Arduino, for example, I'll make sure this is going to 5 volts of power, I'll make sure that this is going to ground, and then I'm going to make sure that this white here is going to the pin that I'm going to write in my Arduino sketch to make sure I control them. working with NeoPixels is pretty much a joy because they give you a library. And the library really kind of abstracts a lot of the things that you need to worry about when trying to, individually address them. So using the library, you basically tell it the number of pixels that you have, what type of pixel type, if you have a specific kind of different pixel type that it might be. And then, it gives you a whole bunch of functions like, setting the pixel color of a specific number of pixel. And so you just look at it as a list. And so it's just going to kind of give you like the first, second, third, whatever pixels that you got down the row. And so, working with them is quite easy in that regard. So for my project, I got a strip of these, and this is 60, but I actually bought one of 120. And what I ended up doing is I stripped out all of this casing, and then I cut them so that I could place them in the heart shapes that I needed. And so you need to make sure you cut right on the middle there. And what I would do is I'd cut right down the middle there, and then when I soldered them, I would actually kind of tin the pads here first, and then I would put whatever wires I wanted in and tin them, and that made it a lot easier for me to work with them and kind of solder them together, which was a very, very quick process. I just had to make sure that I was always following that arrow, because the minute you kind of screw that up, you kind of borked your whole project at that point. So if we look under the hood of my project for TweetHeart, what I had done here outside of the enclosure that I did is, if we take it apart, hopefully I can do this without breaking anything, is you will see the pixels here. And what I did is I went through and I cut them based on the size. And maybe I'll go from the bottom here. And you can start to see that I laid them out, and then I just did wiring from each set to the next set. And so what I did is I cut them out, I placed them, I glued them very, very badly. And I went in, and if we look at the pixels and see if we can get a good kind of version there, you'll see that I just went through and I made sure that my power source is starting here, for example, and that my pixels are going there. And then this connector actually comes back to here, right? And so the wires are kind of going underneath. And so, working with some of that stuff was just tedious, right? And so what I would do is I would hot glue just on top of these connections. Once those connections were good, I'd hot glue so that if I moved it around a little bit or that kind of thing, I just kind of sealed it, right? And so, each time I put a row on, I just, again, count the number of pixels. I would run a sketch in Arduino. I'd make sure it was working, and then I'd keep going up, and I'd keep going up, and I'd, keep going all the way up until the end, right? And so in doing that, I can make sure that I'm starting this as being my first pixel, and the top of the heart over here is my last, right? And so all the wiring just goes underneath. And then what I actually did for this is I separated this out and I put it on magnets. And so I can take this off, and you'll see, maybe you'll see there's magnets there. And so I just put magnets on the back so that I could just kind of click it in. Now, magnets aren't going to screw up your electronics. A lot of people kind of forget that. And so when they start building enclosures, even like the one that I did with Box Maker here, is that people forget that you can use magnets for a lot of that stuff. And they're really handy, especially if you're building enclosures. So this way, what I can do is I can work on this independently and just lay it in where I want to lay it in with those magnets.